Quick question. If you could choose an apocalypse to survive, which one would it be? Let me know your answer in the comments below. Anyway, on to the video. We kick things off with a mad dash through the grim forest. One silhouette is frantically being pursued by two vengeful phantoms, and predictably, the bastard being hunted is the asshole Liam. After his downright loathsome deeds, it seems karma has finally caught up to his hairy ass, and now the shadow of death looms over him. The hateful fucker, true to his cockroach nature, refused to go down so easily. He paused in his pathetic retreat and launched a counterattack on our boys, pelting them with the finger rifle skill. Our Chads, however, were Gs. They easily evaded or tanked the hits, finding no challenge in the pitiful attack. Liam, noticing this, cursed his luck. To think these bastards would push him this far. Well, since it had come to this, he had no choice but to use his trump card. Thinking so, the baboon motherfucker made a beeline out of the forest, heading for the sea in the distance. Upon reaching the shore, he immediately took a fighting stance, resuming his fingering of the boys. Wait, hold up. That doesn't sound right. Let's try that again. He immediately resumed his finger bang on the goddammit. Anyway, he attacked, and our boys dodged, splitting up to divide his attention. For a ranged fighter like himself, such a tactic was particularly effective, as the hateful fool couldn't aim and fire at both of them simultaneously. Our boys, also aware of this, capitalized on the weakness, patiently biding their time for their own counterattack. However, the duo had severely underestimated the wickedness of Liam. Even cornered, the hateful foe was still scheming, deliberately luring them into a trap. And so, to Jeong's surprise, a green silhouette jumped out of the water, catching him completely off guard. What was more surprising was that the ghostly silhouette was someone we already knew, the ponytail Chad, Pauline Nordine. Turns out the Absi Chad had died at some point, morphing into a water ghost. Jeong, taken aback by the strange development, blanked out for a moment. Just what was the French Chad doing there? And was this why the hateful Liam had lured them to this place? The whole situation was so bizarre and confusing to him that even the system notification congratulating them for finding the water ghost was completely ignored. The water ghost, however, wasn't held back by such trivial matters. It immediately clocked our boy, sending him reeling. Jeong, with a grim expression, marveled at the water ghost's absurd strength and speed. If it wasn't for his passive skills, that casual blow would have blown off his arms. Borrowing the momentum, he backpedaled, putting distance between himself and the fiend. Now free from the ghostly clutches, he analyzed the situation. He didn't know how Pauline had morphed into a water ghost, but because of that, they were definitely cooked. Especially since they still had the fucker Liam to worry about. Speaking of the loathsome fool, he finally sighed in relief upon seeing the ghost materialize. Even though the new boss was quite troublesome and had even forced him to retreat pathetically the last time they fought, to him, this was still a favorable outcome. So what if the monster clapped them all? It was still better than being hunted by them. Sometimes the best way to survive was to watch everyone else burn. Flashing Dwayne a cocky smile, he wished the Chad good luck in the upcoming battle. Oh, and just in case he was curious, it was indeed him who led to Pauline's current state. Of course, it wasn't intentional. He'd been scheming and backstabbing. You know, the huge. When the Chad suddenly turned into a water ghost. Turns out killing someone by the sea leads to them morphing into a water ghost. An oversight that almost cost him his life. Anyway, he'd done all that to get Pauline's souls, but because of the sudden transformation, he was forced to escape pathetically. Dwayne, hearing the asshole's rambling, immediately exploded in rage. Even at this point, this Liam bastard continued to surprise him with his trashiness. If he couldn't end this scum of a human, then he'd have no right to call himself the Unit Dwayne. Thinking so, Dwayne leveled up his strength buff skill to level 20. When he did, the skill underwent a bizarre transformation, evolving into the superior grade power of a beast skill. The skill did exactly what the name suggested, granting the wielder the physical abilities of a wild beast. With the new skill in tow, Dwayne lunged at Liam, appearing before the fool in seconds. Liam, stunned by the absurd speed, froze for a second, failing to guard against Dwayne's punch. The hit landed so savagely that Liam's body curved in before being flung into the air. Coughing up a mouthful of blood, Liam's eyes widened in shock. To think the Chad was that powerful. If he didn't immediately lock in, he might very well die here. Thinking so, he aimed at Dwayne, firing a barrage of finger bullets at him. Our boy, however, tanked all the hits, resolutely closing the gap between them. When he finally reached him, he clocked the hateful fucker, sending the fool crashing into the sandy shore. Dwayne, however, didn't escape scot-free. Turns out, in that brief moment of impact, Liam had used a secret technique, inflicting severe damage on him. Although he didn't know exactly what he'd done, the blow was deep enough to mess up his innards. Liam, finally recovering from the onslaught, sighed regretfully. He'd wanted to stab Dwayne's vitals with that blow, but alas, things didn't work out. However, because of that, he'd learned an interesting fact about Dwayne. The Chad had absurd strength skills, but none of them particularly protected his body. That is to say, if he could avoid his gorilla-like strength, then he should be able to inflict decent damage with his nail hook. Speaking of the nail hook, this was a skill that allowed the user to extend their nails and use them as hooks. Jeong, finally remembering he was the MC of this manhwa, spawned in real quick to give some exposition. He warned Dwayne about Liam's regeneration ability, the same cheat-like ability he had. If he was to fight the slimy fiend, he had to be wary of that. With that said, he immediately skedaddled, disappearing to who knows where. The gentle Chad was left pondering the matter. Not only did Liam have a regeneration ability, but he also had a shit ton of potions. Couple that with the obvious trump cards he was hiding, and it was apparent, underestimating him was a one-way ticket to the afterlife. However, the fool wasn't all-powerful. He was at least sure his last hit did a number on him, and if he could press the attack, then avenging the mommies was a possibility. Liam, now all juiced up and fully recovered, challenged Dwayne to a second round. He was particularly interested in paying Dwayne back for that nasty punch earlier. Dwayne, not one to back down in the face of treacherous assholes, immediately pressed the attack. So what if the bastard had insane regeneration and trump cards? All he had to do was create an opening and pummel him to the ground. With that, he lunged forward, blocking and tanking all the finger bullets aimed at him. Liam, still feeling cocky, mocked the giant Chad, calling him foolish for charging at him so openly. Maybe before he could have been caught lacking, but now he was already familiar with his speed. So what could he possibly do? Dwayne, however, didn't reply. He simply entered a punching stance, cocking his arm back. Before Liam could react, he immediately punched the sandy shore, kicking up a huge sand cloud. Liam, taken aback by the odd development, chuckled haughtily at the pathetic stunt. Did Dwayne really think he'd be tricked by something this obvious? No matter what he did next, his moves were predictable. He'd either appear from the right or the left. Either way, when he showed up, he'd have a nasty surprise waiting for him. Smiling grimly, he urged Dwayne to show himself. He'd be sure to kill him this time. Dwayne, however, didn't show himself. He stayed hidden behind the huge curtain of sand. I don't know what kind of fucked up gravity lag has, but this sand cloud sure is taking its time to fall. Liam, equally puzzled by the lagging sand, shouted at Dwayne to show himself, calling him a bitch for hiding. Obviously, Dwayne didn't fall for such petty taunts, and besides, Liam had no right to call anyone a bitch, seeing as he had a mega bitch slap plastered across his face. Like damn, just how hard did Dwayne hit the bastard? Speaking of the gentle Chad, a shadowy phantom suddenly streaked on the right side, hinting at his inevitable counterattack. Liam, noticing this, immediately aimed at the phantom, ready to shoot. However, this turned out to be nothing but a feint. The giant Chad was actually attacking from the left. Liam, having expected this, smiled deviously. He quickly unloaded 2 hot ones on the silhouette, punching holes through the sand curtain. To his shock, this too was a feint. The giant Chad didn't attack from either direction. Instead, he blitzed through the middle, drop-kicking the living shit out of Liam. The blow sent the bastard reeling, causing him to crash pitifully into the hard ground. Despite his grave injuries, our boy didn't let up. He swiftly closed in, preparing another stomp attack on the hateful fellow. Normally, he wouldn't be doing this, but for Liam, this loathsome fucker, he was ready to make an exception. Saying so, Dwayne landed a vicious stomp kick on Liam's knee, causing the bastard to wail in agony. As satisfying as this was to see, it was also such a shame. I mean, his balls were right there. Why didn't he stomp on them fuckers instead? Anyway, I digress. Liam, enraged and in pain, launched his counterattack, pelting Dwayne with a barrage of finger bullets. Our boy, however, easily shrugged off the blows. What were a couple of puny bullets to his Chadly physique? Rather, he held onto Liam's treacherous hand, breaking it like a twig. As he'd said before, it really wasn't in his nature to torture someone, but for some strange reason, Liam's scream sounded like music in his ears. The bastard, clearly frantic, swung at Dwayne, his ghostly claws aiming for his face. Caught off guard by the insidious attack, Dwayne fumbled, barely sacrificing his hand to block the blow. Before he could launch his CHADY counter, probably involving the Wayne Brady principle, the scene switched to Jeong, showcasing his battle with the water ghost. Seems like the author finally remembered who was the top dog in his manhwa and decided to give our boy some screen time. However, currently, Jeong's chattiness was not chattying since he was losing pathetically to the water ghost. Despite his savage slashes, the fiend was eating them like candy, finding no challenge in the blows. Jeong, fed up with the stalemate, blitzed the ghost, sending it flying into the distance. He didn't know what the resilient bastard was made of, but surely with its neck broken, it would be dead, right? Nope. Lag was like, fuck that. This wasn't the place to defeat enemies with wishful thinking and the power of friendship. He could save that bullshit for Naruto. In here, people fought like men, desperate and bloody. And so, to Jeong's surprise, the ghostly fucker got back up, fixing its broken neck like it was nothing. Our boy, cursing his shitty luck, scowled at the fiend, rage evident on his face. He wondered why the ghost had such absurd resilience, high enough to shrug off broken necks. Even if it was lag, this was getting ridiculous. Anyway, seems the best way forward was to chop off its neck or mince it to pieces. Only then would its death be assured. However, that was easier said than done, since his bone blade couldn't even scratch it. Not to mention, the ghost wasn't the only foe he had to worry about. There was still Liam in the equation. But he couldn't afford to be bothered by him right now. The situation had developed to a state where any carelessness from them would get them instantly killed. So, as much as he wanted to drag that loathsome fool into the fray and use him as a meat shield, he couldn't do so. All he could do was trust in Dwayne to handle him and trust in himself to solo the water ghost. As if it had sensed Jeong's resolve, the ghost roared, its voice bellowing out like sound waves. Jeong, identifying this as the signal to lock the fuck in, immediately entered a fighting stance. He quickly deduced that his current strength alone wouldn't be enough to defeat the foe. If he wanted to do that, then significant upgrades had to be made. And so, with that in mind, our boy burned through his souls, leveling up his swordsmanship, pain relief, lizard tail, and tough skin skills to levels 10, 5, 3, and 7, respectively. With that done, Jeong braced for impact, tanking the ghost's lunge attack with strained ease. Acting quickly, he immediately countered, landing a vicious kick on its flank. For any living being, this could have been considered an effective attack, one aimed to immobilize the enemy through pain. However, since the water ghost didn't feel pain, nor did it fear it, the attack ended up amounting to dog shit. Jeong, noticing this, immediately switched to the next ace up his sleeve, lightning shock. Channeling his Thor-type shit, he bathed the ghost in brilliant lightning, knocking it back. And I don't know if it's just me, but somehow the water ghost looks hella zesty in this scene. Or maybe it's hitting the nay-nay, who knows. Anyway, the blow from the attack sent it backpedaling, allowing Jeong a well-deserved reprieve. Analyzing the foe, he noticed that electric attacks didn't work on it either. So far, he'd managed to do 0 damage to it, and if that continued, he'd find himself in a troublesome situation. Desperate and cornered, he contemplated using the Door of Limitation skill but swiftly shot it down. He had no idea what the fallout would be for using the skill. If it turned out to be a massive depletion of his stamina, then he'd truly be fucked. Finding it wise to play it safe, he instead leveled up his strong bones and calm breathing skills. With the 2 skills, he could enhance the power of his bone blade and also decrease the stamina consumption when using said skill. Though not nearly as effective as he'd liked, this was all he could do for now. As he charged at the ghost, Jeong reflected on the actions he should take. Methodical thinking and planning wouldn't work on such a foe. What he needed was something else. Something primal. He had to move instinctively, use unconventional methods to throw it off. And although it might sound flashy when he said it like that, what the bastard actually meant was that he'd be fighting hella dirty in this fight. Acting on this, Jeong threw sand into the ghost's eyes, temporarily blinding it. He capitalized on this opening, spawning behind the fiend, his bone blade at the ready. Even if it was sturdy, he wanted to see if it could still fight back after getting decapitated. With this thought, he decisively swung at the ghost, offering a gentle prayer for Pauline to finally rest in peace. This prayer, however, was bitch-slapped away by Lag when Pauline briskly raised his arm, using it to block the incoming slash. Channeling its horror-type shit, the ghost leaned back, scaring the shit out of our boy. Before he could react, the ghost countered, landing a back kick on his ass, forcing him to cough up a mouthful of blood. Jeong, now backpedaling from the blow, cursed his shitty luck. Even while fighting dirty, this bastard still refused to die. Not only that, but his bone blade upgrades turned out to be straight trash. Well, since it had come to this, he had no choice but to go hard. If long and narrow won't do it, then he'd have to go with short and girthy. Pause. In this state, he was sure he'd be able to do a number on the resilient fucker, especially if he aimed at the neck it had been instinctively protecting. As Jeong was still organizing his big brain plots destined to be bitch-slapped by the water ghost, the fiend in question was making some bizarre moves. Crouching down, it lunged at our boy, its arm performing a strange clawing motion. When it did so, a ghostly black aura enveloped its hand, causing alarm bells to go off in Jeong's mind. Although he didn't know what the hell it was, his spidey senses were tingling, warning him of the impending fucktitude. And true to his instincts, the ghost clawed forward, hurling a black beam of death towards him. Jeong, overwhelmed by primal fear, stared gravely at the attack. He didn't know what bullshit hole the ghost pulled this move from, but one thing was for certain. This was the closest he'd ever come to death since his regression. Not only was the attack ridiculously fast, making dodging impossible, but also bizarrely threatening, as if death was inevitable once hit by it. As things stood, his chatty ass might very well ascend to heaven after this blow. Before the attack could land and effectively kickstart an epic reunion with Garcia Mommy, we switched scenes to the bloody battle with Dwayne. The Chad, having narrowly blocked the lethal blow, clasped Liam's hand, yanking his bleeding arm from his ghastly claws. Applying pressure, he warned the bastard not to have any foolish fantasies of dying easily. He was to suffer so much that death would feel like paradise to him. Saying so, Dwayne pulled and twisted, breaking Liam's arm like a bloody twig. Overwhelming pain assaulted Liam, driving him to the brink of insanity. He shouted at Dwayne, promising to kill him in the most agonizing way possible. Dwayne, however, ignored the fool. He told him to shut his hole. If it wasn't for the possibility that he would turn into a water ghost after dying, then he would have long killed his hateful ass. That being said, just because he couldn't kill him didn't mean he couldn't make him wish he was dead instead. Saying so, Dwayne clocked the shit out of Liam, feeding the loathsome fucker a black knuckle sandwich. Dust clouds blew from the attack, and Liam, the loving recipient of this generous meal, had his face completely rearranged. Never had I ever thought I'd get this much satisfaction from watching a bastard bleed. But honestly, I believe I'm not the only one. Most of you are probably feeling the same way. And judging by Dwayne's expression, our boy is equally ecstatic. We switch scenes back to Jeong. Our boy, unlike us, was currently shitting his pants. Forget joy. He was instead in the deepest pits of hell, with the Grim Reaper gently pecking on his lips. No matter how hard he tried, he just couldn't find a feasible solution to his current predicament. All his skills and equipment were useless, and the only choice left was to somehow tank it and pray for the best. As he was still resigning himself to fate, a Chad in shiny armor came along, saving his doomed ass from death. Dwayne, with his power of a beast skill, roared at the claw attack, eating away at its absurd power. Jeong, capitalizing on this weakness, slashed apart the death beam, barely clinging to his life in that desperate moment. The ghost, however, wasn't done with its offensive. It immediately pressed the attack, lunging decisively at our boy. Caught off guard by the relentless barrage, Jeong tanked a punch from the water ghost, causing his innards to tremble violently. Dwayne, jumping back in, clocked the ghost, sending it reeling into the distance. With that assist, Jeong finally got a breather, which he used to settle his chaotic state. Done with the adjustments, our boys immediately pressed the attack, leaving no room for the ghost to adapt. Performing a jump attack, Jeong slashed off the ghost's hand, bathing his short sword with its blood. Dwayne, not to be outdone, charged back in, landing a brutal low kick on the fiend's leg. The fiend, however, was done playing punching bag. It countered Dwayne's blow, connecting a double punch to his chest. Jeong, capitalizing on the opening from its wild swing, lunged back in, his bone blade screaming murder. On the other end, Dwayne also pressed forward, effectively trapping the ghost in a pincer attack. Finding itself caught between two giants, the ghost had no choice but to abandon protecting its neck and face both sides simultaneously. Our boy, noticing this, smirked widely. This was the chance he'd been waiting for. With the ghost unable to protect its neck, this was the best moment to slash off its hateful head. And so, with that thought, Jeong pressed forward, nimbly dodging the ghost's counterattack. Borrowing from his swing momentum, he delivered a nasty slash to the fiend's neck, hoping to decapitate the fool. However, the boss's neck turned out to be hella sturdy, forcefully blocking the sword slash. At that critical moment, Dwayne spawned the fuck in, connecting a savage punch to the ghost's face. Under Dwayne and Jeong's collective attacks, the fiend finally succumbed, losing its head in glorious fashion. With that, the battle ended, and the Chad Pauline was finally freed from his torturous fate. Jeong, recalling he still had another asshole to handle, asked Dwayne about Liam. The gentle Chad told him not to worry. Considering the state Liam was in, he was practically dead. In fact, there was no need to tell him. He could see for himself. However, when he turned around to show Jeong, the bastard Liam was nowhere to be seen. Dwayne, visibly shocked, quickly ran to the bloody shore, wondering where the cockroach motherfucker had gone. Even in that state, had that hateful bastard really escaped? The MC, analyzing the blood trails, deduced that Liam must have escaped into the sea, a fact that made tracking him insanely difficult. Dwayne, however, was adamant. He insisted on chasing down Liam. With his injured state, he couldn't have gone far. Jeong immediately brushed off the idea, instead focusing on something else. He asked Dwayne if there was a possibility Liam would turn into a water ghost if he died in the sea. Dwayne replied that he wasn't sure. Even if the bastard drowned, the system might treat it as his technical kill, so there was no way to tell. All they could do was hope for the best. Jeong agreed, though inwardly, he was hella skeptical. This was L.A.G. Wishful thinking never ended well in that hell. So before shit hit the fan, which it inevitably would, he told Dwayne to bounce. They were leaving that bitch. We switched scenes to the shore of the sea. Our boy, always a merciful Chad, was conducting a short funeral for the Poppy Pauline. Although they'd only known the French Chad for a little bit, in that time, he'd proven to be a good comrade. So this was the least they could do. Offering a gentle prayer, Jeong wished the Chad a smooth transition into the afterlife. Hopefully, in that paradise, he'd get all the croissants and baguettes to satiate his French desires. Done with the manly tears moment, our boys immediately shifted their attention to the system notification. As you'd expect, it announced the completion of the main mission and side mission, specifically, finding the water ghost. Because of this deed, the two recipients, Jeong Big Daddy Hyeok and Dwayne The Rock Smith, would be rewarded as previously promised. They would both receive a random piece of equipment themed after the water ghost. For Dwayne, the equipment was the water ghost's arm. When equipped, it would buff physical ability in proportion to his agility stat, and additionally, it would grant the passive skill, Tough Skin, level 10. For Jeong, it was the water ghost's leg. Similar to the arm piece, it also provided a buff to physical ability in proportion to his agility stat. However, the passive skill granted was different. In his case, it was Stride Reducer, probably a movement-type skill. Anyway, with the new drip, our boys were officially ready to leave that hell. Dwayne, taking the moment to voice the obvious, asked Jeong how they were meant to cross the seemingly endless sea. Jeong replied that he need not worry. While he was being violated by the water ghost earlier, he'd happened to spot a boat off in the distance. Using that, they should be able to cross the sea. And so, the two Chads, now devoid of the mommies they once had, set off on their next adventure, hope evident in their hearts. If L.A.G had any shred of decency, it would send some baddies their way. However, they didn't hold out hope for that, especially since the sadistic author would just kill them off again. We switch scenes to the two Chads still braving the boundless sea. Dwayne, suspiciously more talkative than usual, worriedly asked Jeong if it was okay to proceed like that. They still couldn't see the end of the sea, after all. Jeong, still calm, replied that it was cool. Maybe Dwayne hadn't noticed, but the currents were subtly leading them in a specific direction. If he were to guess, then their destination should be at the end of said currents. Dwayne, still feeling uneasy, wanted to issue an objection when suddenly the whole boat trembled, violently thrashing on the chaotic sea. Taken aback, the two Chads immediately went on high alert, their focus shifting to the churning water. Dwayne, arguably with the worst timing in history, suddenly shouted at Jeong, letting him know he had something to confess. Jeong, obviously sensing where this was going, immediately shut down the sussy Chad. Just because he was maidenless didn't mean he wanted to explore the famous Brokeback Mountains. Dwayne, however, told him to cut the bullshit. That's not what he wanted to say. Instead, his real concern was that he couldn't swim. Jeong, hearing this, exclaimed incredulously, What kind of bullshit stereotype was Dwayne on about? Surely, as a modern-day black man, he should know how to swim, right? Dwayne, however, told him to chill. He was down with the culture, but he really couldn't swim. If the ensuing battle ended up being a water fight, then he'd truly be useless. Before Jeong could rack his brain for a solution, a silhouette jetted out of the water, cleaving their boat in two. The silhouette, to the duo's disbelief, was actually the asshole Liam, back to torment them even after death. Jeong, cursing the persistent motherfucker, drew his bone blade, rage evident on his face. Even after dying and turning into a water ghost, this cockroach Liam still insisted on making things difficult for them. Well, to hell with it. He would make sure to finish off the bastard this time. Saying so, Jeong launched his electric blast, bathing the ghostly phantom in blue. Liam, however, just tanked the hits, grabbing Jeong by the throat. Before Dwayne could react, Liam swiftly dove back into the sea, carrying Jeong along with him. Our boy, left dazed and confused, frantically planned his next move, worry etched on his face. He considered diving in after Jeong but quickly remembered that he couldn't swim. If he did so, then he'd only be a liability to the big unit. Then should he stay there? No, that wasn't an option either. Because of that asshole Liam, the boat was broken beyond repair, and it was just a matter of time before it completely collapsed. Surviving on it was definitely not an option. As he was still contemplating his next step, two new water ghosts jumped out of the sea, scaring the shit out of him. Dwayne, understandably shocked, stared at the water ghosts, wondering where these fuckers had even come from. That aside, what was this dude doing with a basketball in L.A.G? Was the author high or something? Well, it's not like he had the luxury to jest. Now was the time to lock the fuck in. We switch scenes to Jeong, still being dragged into the depths. Our boy, having expected this, immediately activated his water-breathing skill, taking huge gulps to steady himself. Some might be stunned by such developments. But for him, a regressor, this was just another Tuesday. He, more than anyone, knew how sadistic L.A.G was and had always been prepared, stocking up on the relevant skills. However, even if that was the case, he still found himself struggling, unable to pry Liam's hand from his neck. Not to mention, Liam wasn't the only ghost he had to be wary of. From the looks of it, this sea had turned into a graveyard for the players in B531, and now that graveyard was wide open, releasing all its inhabitants to hunt his sorry ass. Jeong, resolute not to die so pathetically, called upon his bone blade, immediately morphing it into its second form. Even though Liam had turned into a water ghost, that didn't mean his previous injuries were gone. Rather, the sweet damage Dwayne had dealt him was still evident on his body. If Jeong wanted to survive this ordeal, then he had to capitalize on said damage and pave a way for himself to safety. Thinking so, Jeong savagely slashed off Liam's arm, kicking himself free from the bastard. With that done, our boy immediately prepared to leave, wanting no part in the smoke the other ghosts promised. However, before he could move, he suddenly saw a massive wall in front of him, causing him to hesitate. Jeong, brows furrowed, wondered what the hell was going on. From what he could remember, there wasn't a wall in the sea when he was still above water, so what the fuck was this? Could it be that L.A.G had hidden the door to the next room below the sea just to fuck with them? Well, this was L.A.G, so it was entirely possible. However, something about this wall gave him a very bad feeling. As he mulled it over, Jeong suddenly realized why the wall gave him the creeps. It wasn't a wall at all. Rather, it was the skin of a stupidly humongous being. And that said being was now wide awake. Its ghastly eye locked onto Jeong. Predictably, our boy said, "Fuck that." He immediately turned to flee. Only a lunatic would stick around and fish in such troubled waters. But despite his quick and borderline cowardly response, how could the beast let him escape so easily? It quickly opened its mouth, sucking in all the water in the surrounding area. Jeong, caught up in the turbulent currents, was also properly sucked, his soul almost leaving his body. However, despite all this, he still wasn't deterred. He swiftly said deuces to the big bastard, turned around, and swam with all his might. Under the intense pressure of death, our boy gave it his all, using every ounce of strength to escape. And as unbelievable as it was, he finally figured out what was chasing him. It turned out to be a whale. A big-ass, big-back mutant whale, a special variant found only in L.A.G. Jeong, delighted by his findings but still undoubtedly cooked, doubled his speed, doing everything in his power to swim against the sucking force. Unfortunately, even this fell short. and our boy was reluctantly pulled into the whale's mouth, powerless to stop it. The end. Psych. I'm just fucking with you. How could our boy die so easily? After being swallowed up and drifting in darkness for what seemed like an eternity, a system notification sounded, welcoming him to room B54. Jeong, understandably confused, wondered which idiot came up with the brilliant idea to make a whale's stomach a challenge room. If he found that perverted bastard, he'd be sure to whoop his ass. The system, however, was unbothered by his ramblings. It swiftly explained the room's mission. The main mission was to kill that which looked like a human, but was not. It further added that once the imposter was killed, the one who pretends to be human would be enraged. Honestly, I don't know if the translation is just ass or if something else is going on. However, from what I can gather, there are 2 imposters in the room. The main goal is to kill the first imposter, but doing so would piss off the second imposter, making things even more dangerous. So in essence, the goal was the same as usual. Fuck shit up and survive. Jeong, still kneeling in the darkness, switched his focus to the 3rd system notification. This panel highlighted the rewards promised once the main goal was completed: 30 souls and a random passive skill. It also highlighted the bonus side mission, which was to kill the second imposter. If he did that, he'd be given an additional reward, specifically, a rune currently owned by the second imposter. Done with the mission details, Jeong analyzed his surroundings. Unfortunately, the place was so dark that his casual analysis yielded no results. Activating his Owl Eye skill, a skill that, honestly, I genuinely don't remember him getting, he could finally pierce the darkness and see as clearly as day. Our boy, now with his sight back, groped the walls, trying to get a feel for how sturdy they were. To his shock, he realized that, contrary to the soft, wet, and mushy feel you'd expect from a whale's innards, the walls were surprisingly sturdy. In fact, they had the same indestructible structure as the walls of the various rooms he'd tested before. That is to say, the stomach of the whale was a true and bona fide room, one able to lead him to the 6th basement floor, if he conquered it. Although he still couldn't wrap his mind around how such a thing was possible, he chalked it up to this being L.A.G. Anything was possible in that hell. Deciding not to dwell on it, Jeong inevitably had his thoughts wander to the CHADY. He sincerely hoped the unit survived, even if the possibility of that happening was low. Damn it, of all the black stereotypes Dwayne could have chosen to portray, why the fuck did he pick not knowing how to swim? That was such bullshit. Because of that, he might very well lose his best comrade in that hell. Well, it had already happened, so there was no point in fretting over it now. His mission remained the same. He would survive, conquer, and escape L.A.G, even if he had to do it alone. Acting on this, Jeong resolutely made his way down the gloomy corridor. Well, it couldn't really be called a corridor, more like the innards of a whale. Or, in other words, he was deep in them guts. After walking for a while, Jeong heard a low rustling sound from up ahead, causing him to pause. Though it was still indiscernible, he could vaguely identify it as the sound of footsteps. And if there were footsteps, then it only meant one thing. He wasn't the only one alive there. Acting quickly, Jeong immediately summoned his bone blade and entered his fighting stance, ready for whatever shit might fall. However, even after waiting for a bit, the other party didn't make their move. It seemed they too had sensed Jeong and responded accordingly. Our boy, mulling it over, deduced that the other party must be setting up an ambush just as he had been doing. Well, if that was the case, like hell he'd let them prepare. He'd rather hit their ass with a preemptive attack, catching them off guard. Acting on this, Jeong swiftly made a beeline for the corner, his electric shock sizzling in his palm. When he got there, he decisively launched his attack, hoping to catch the stalker lacking. However, the creepy fellow pulled a reverse Uno on his ass, catching him lacking. Just when he thought he had the upper hand, the stranger blasted him with a light skill, effectively blinding him. Though not particularly powerful in terms of physical damage, the light skill, when used properly, as in this case, could instantly nerf the attackee's fighting potential. Jeong, now finding himself in a perilous situation, cursed his rashness. If only he'd been more patient, he wouldn't have fallen for such a simple trap. Well, it had already happened, so there was no point in beating himself up over it. From his calculations, he'd need a couple of seconds to fully recover his eyesight. However, that didn't mean he couldn't fight back. Employing his rich combat experience and MC plot armor bullshit, he quickly deduced the assailant's position and decisively swung at them. However, the slippery fellow nimbly dodged his attack, rendering it useless. Jeong, picking up on a new trail, swiftly launched another attack, bathing the corridor in lightning. Unfortunately, even this missed, making the total L count 2. Our boy, tired of taking L's, decided on a tactical retreat, hopefully buying enough time to recover. He rapidly backpedaled, putting distance between himself and the enemy. After a bit of vigilant waiting, his vision gradually cleared, enabling him to see his attacker at last. To his, or rather my delight, the new frenemy wasn't a monster but instead a gothic mommy doing the Spider-Man pose. However, just because the author heard my prayers and gifted us another baddie didn't mean our boy could relax. From their short exchange earlier, he'd identified her as a formidable enemy, one capable of giving even him a hard time. The gothic baddie, eyeing our boy warily, praised him for his rich combat instincts. Even when blinded, he could still trace her and attack in her direction, an act that greatly surprised her. However, as much as she could glaze him all day long, it was time to stop fucking around. She let him know she had no desire to fight him, so she'd very much appreciate it if he didn't attack her as well. Upon hearing the subtle hints of cooperation, both I and Jeong immediately identified her as a potential mommy. Specifically, the mommy Kara, gothic girl Levine. Her public attribute was that pain and damage would be doubled whenever she received a physical attack. Currently, her highest skill level was 13. Jeong, obviously less thirsty than I am, questioned Kara on how he could trust her. This was L.A.G after all. Words didn't mean shit in that place. Kara replied that her words were genuine. If she'd wanted to attack him, she would have done so earlier instead of restraining herself. Jeong, warily eyeing the baddie, noted that she wasn't showing any obvious signs of hostility. However, he'd be a fool to believe what she showed. Not once or twice had he been fucked over by innocent-looking people, so it was best to be careful. Addressing Kara, he asked her how long she'd been in that room. Kara replied that it had been approximately 10 hours. She then emphasized her earlier response, saying she truly had no desire to fight him. Not for a couple of souls, at least. To her, it was better to team up and kill monsters rather than attack and kill fellow humans. Jeong, analyzing the naive baddie, asked her if she was alone. Kara confirmed this, explaining that all her companions had died in the previous room. As for what room she meant by previous, it was room B531. The same room Jeong had just left. Our boy, mulling it over, noted that the mysterious water ghosts he'd seen at the end were most likely Kara's companions. If that was so, then her story had a bit of credibility. Kara, on the other hand, was equally eyeing our boy, utilizing her filming equipment skill to study him. And yes, I shit you not, the skill is actually called filming equipment. I don't know what fucked up naming sense the author has, but hey, it is what it is. The MC, noticing her glowing eyes, told her to stop wasting stamina and whip out her light skill. She might not know this, but unlike her half-baked filming equipment skill, oh god, what a stupid name, he could actually see her quite clearly. Kara, enlightened and a bit panicked, immediately deployed her light skill, letting its glow cover the gloomy corridor. Jeong, analyzing the glow, identified it as the light that flashbanged his eyes earlier. To think Kara had actually leveled it up to M rank, an action that greatly puzzled him. As far as he knew, the light skill was just a basic skill, so why level it up that much? Or was there a hidden component he was missing? Well, no point stressing over it. The baddie had the right to do whatever she wanted. Speaking of the baddie, she asked Jeong what he planned to do. Would he believe her words, or would they part ways there? Jeong, always the gentleman, swiftly deactivated his bone blade. He too had no desire to fight and kill pointlessly. Saying so, he calmly walked past Kara, heading deeper into the corridor. After walking for a while, he casually turned and rizzed Kara. What was she doing just standing around? Didn't she want to go with the big poppy? Well, it was completely up to her, so she could decide. Kara, a bit flustered by our boy's CHADY aura, stuttered for a bit before following suit. Like hell she'd miss out on such an opportunity. With that, a new baddie joined the squad, and we immediately switched to them walking deeper into the dark corridor. Kara, taking advantage of the moment, asked Jeong about his situation. Had he been alone the whole time? Jeong replied that he had a team, although most of them were dead already. Kara, picking up on this, asked if they were in the same situation. Jeong denied this, explaining that in his case, one of his comrades had managed to survive, though they were eventually separated. Kara asked why that was the case, and Jeong replied that it was out of their control. The monsters had attacked, forcing them to split up and him to get sucked into that room. However, he was not particularly worried about his companion. The dude was a CHADY unit, so he was sure he'd survive somehow. As they talked, Jeong's steps gradually slowed until he completely stopped. Gazing forward, he visibly scowled at the lingering smell of blood in the air. Addressing Kara, he warned her to be careful. Shit might get active soon enough. The gothic mommy, also picking up on the smell, asked Jeong if the scent was coming from the hidden silhouette off in the distance. Jeong confirmed this, though he added that he sensed no movement from the fellow. From the looks of it, the only way to learn more was to get closer. And so the duo cautiously advanced until the shadowy silhouette was completely revealed. It turned out to be a dude with his heart completely removed. Kara, gazing at the corpse, stated that she knew him. He was one of the bastards that had killed her friends in the last room. Jeong, studying the crime scene further, noted that there weren't any signs of monsters attacking. From the looks of it, this seemed like a murder committed by humans. Kara wasn't particularly surprised by this. She told Jeong that the group that had attacked her team were precisely the kind of scum who would kill anyone if it benefited them. Jeong, mulling it over, stared deeper into the darkness. If what Kara said was true, then the bastards must be up ahead. Probably up to no good. However, even with that being said, something about the baddie's story didn't make sense to him. If her whole team was wiped out, then how did she escape, without injuries, at that? Kara, hearing the question, sighed sadly, her eyes downcast. She let Jeong know that the attack was an ambush. They were facing off against the fishmen when suddenly a group of 4 ambushed them from the rear, causing significant casualties to their group. Deeming it a lost battle, she, alongside Pauline, made a run for it, barely escaping with their lives. Hearing the mention of the French Chad, Jeong gave more credibility to her story. From the looks of it, the gothic baddie wasn't faking it. Turning to the strange corpse, he asked her to tell him more about the assailants. Kara replied that of the 4, there was a figure with dark hair, but she didn't see his face clearly. Obviously, another one was the now dead bastard before them. As for the remaining 2, one was an abnormal old man with white hair and a mustache, while the other was an asshole with the distinct characteristic of shooting out his nails like bullets. Jeong, hearing the last description, immediately identified him as Liam. Only that loathsome fucker had that distinct skill. However, that begged the question. Why did Liam abandon the group and eventually seek them out to partner up? It didn't make sense. Kara, unaware of his inner thoughts, continued with her sad girl monologue. She confessed that Pauline had died to Liam's attacks while trying to escape, and she, like a coward, had capitalized on that moment to get away. Although shameful, that's how she survived, and if Jeong wanted to, he could go ahead and criticize her. Jeong, however, consoled the baddie. He let her know he had no intentions of criticizing her. Besides, it wasn't her fault. Anyone would have reacted the same way when faced with the same situation. Channeling his Fang Yuan type shit, he told the baddie that life was all that mattered. Only fools would die for stupid things like revenge and bravado. In this life, true bravery was surviving no matter what. Only when alive would you have the chance to take the next step. And besides, with how things ended up, it could be said that Pauline's grudge was somewhat resolved. Kara, hearing this, puzzlingly asked what he meant. Jeong replied that Liam, the bastard, had a bit of history with them. When they met, they made sure Liam went swimming with the fishes. Quite literally. So that is to say, of the original 4 attackers, 2 were now dead, and only 2 remained. Kara, hearing this, heaved a sigh of relief. At least some of her comrades' grudges had been resolved. However, if this fool was here, didn't it mean the other 2 were probably lurking nearby? Jeong, always the chill Chad, told her not to worry about it. They'd find out soon enough anyway. Kara, taking the hint, immediately dropped the issue. Instead, she asked Jeong if she'd passed the test. Upon Jeong's feigned puzzlement, she told him to cut the bullshit. It was quite obvious he was testing her. Testing to see whether she was trustworthy or not. Well, what was his conclusion? Did he deem her reliable or nah? Jeong, taken aback by her acute senses, replied passively. He let the baddie know that she had barely passed. Of course, this was a lie. With how desperately maidenless he was, any mommy would pass the trust test ASAP. Kara, however, had no idea how severely parched Jeong was. She falsely chalked up his response to him being cold. Well, not that it bothered her. It was actually better if he didn't trust so easily. Our boy, tactically switching the topic, questioned Kara about her individual battle prowess. Did she have enough strength to solo a fight? Kara replied that she was blessed with them hands. So long as she wasn't ambushed, she could guarantee a victory against most players. As she was still self-glazing, rustling and groaning sounds came from up ahead, causing them to stop. The duo, now on high alert, watched attentively as a bloody hand rounded the corner, followed by a severely injured man. The bastard, with a gaping hole in his flank, desperately called out to them, begging to be saved. However, upon learning that he was one of the two attackers, Jeong instead entered a battle stance, ready to fuck shit up. This, however, wasn't necessary, as the Mohawk motherfucker soon toppled, dying pathetically due to his wounds. Kara, taken aback, asked Jeong what was up with the treacherous fool. Jeong replied that, judging by his familiar wounds, he must have been done in by the same person who killed the other dude. As for why he'd done so, he had no idea. As he was still mulling it over, a new silhouette rounded the corner, catching him off guard. Jeong, visibly spooked, wondered how the creepy dude had sneaked up on him, bypassing his flawless detection. Not only that, but the old perv wasn't human, as evidenced by the fact that his character panel displayed his characteristic instead of his public attribute, as is the case when encountering a monster. Speaking of the character panel, it highlighted the monster's name, Zepekiyo. Its characteristic was that it was similar to humans, but not quite. Currently, its highest skill level was 18. The crazy motherfucker, eyeing the duo, praised them for looking like a great couple before losing all interest in them. It then shifted its focus to the dead bastard, casually collecting his souls. Jeong, witnessing this, immediately went on high alert. Never in his multiple regressions had he ever heard of a monster like this. Not only that, but the bastard seemed capable of using souls, which was truly outrageous. If he were to guess, then this being was the true reason Liam abandoned that group and sought them out. Zepekiyo, with a crazed look in its eyes, finally turned to face the duo, urging them to partner up with it. Jeong, however, ignored that bullshit. Who would be crazy enough to team up with a monster? And besides, the fact that this thing could freely move between rooms meant it wasn't to be underestimated. How could he add such a time bomb to his squad? Thinking to this point, our boy immediately locked the fuck in, burning his souls to level up his skills. He leveled up Calm Breathing and Electric Shock to levels 15 and 10. Upon reaching level 10, Electric Shock underwent a qualitative change, morphing into the superior skill Electric Level 1. With this new skill, he gained the ability to freely morph and shape the electricity to his desired form. Done with his preparation, Jeong swiftly entered a fighting stance. Zepekiyo, noticing the duo had no intentions of submitting, immediately changed its tone, instantly becoming more aggressive. It warned the duo not to refuse, as refusal meant they'd be killed by him. On top of that, if they still refused, then he'd make sure to properly entertain Kara, giving her a bit of this and that. Damn, this bastard. Kara, hearing that, immediately got enraged, yeeting the pervert bastard with a fireball. Turns out the casual light she was using was actually a level 9 fireball, capable of outrageous damage. Jeong, realizing this, sweated slightly. However, because of that, he was finally convinced of Kara's sincerity. She truly had no desire to fight humans. Locking back in, our boy manifested his electric skill, morphing the currents into a whip shape. Addressing Kara, he laid out the battle plan. He'd restrict Zepekiyo's movements while she attacked the fucker from the back. With that said, Jeong immediately lashed out his whip, trapping the beast in an electric bind. The bastard, tanking through the electric shock, threatened Jeong to think through his actions carefully. If he truly rejected his offer, then he'd have no option but to kill them. Jeong, barely keeping the beast at bay, cursed his shitty luck. Who would have thought electric skills would be so useless in L.A.G? Well, it wasn't completely useless. It was definitely dealing damage to Zepekiyo. It was only that the fiend felt no pain, hence tanking most of the damage. Anyway, if that was the case, then he might as well go hard. He had a new mommy to impress after all.